what this has been like to fight a bill that was anti wildlife, that was an attack on biodiversity, and so much more. So some of y'all might have joined our previous calls in this campaign and learned a bit about it. If you didn't, that's okay. We're going to talk about that too. But just excited to see folks here on an evening, no matter where you're at. And we'll go ahead and get started. We can go to the next slide. Awesome. And so we're going to do introductions. I want everybody on this panel, every face that you can see to introduce themselves. But I'll frame up kind of the question here. So the why are you here? I know that's big. You're probably like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to type about why I'm fighting for wildlife or all the things in my life that led me to being on a call at 8 p.m. Eastern time or wherever else you are, time zone. And that's okay. It can be as simple as I'm here because I love wolves, or I'm here because I know the Endangered Species Coalition, or the folks at Gotham Bat, or Green Latinos. It's just nice to know why you're in the movement, why you're here tonight, and what you want to get out of this. So why are you here? Maybe you're here to learn how to beat the House's big extinction bill. Maybe you want to hear a little bit about what's going on in the Senate. But it's just good to know up front. And then where are you from? I think sometimes it can get a little lonely. I feel lonely sometimes here in North Carolina fighting for wildlife all on my lonesome. And it's kind of rewarding to see people across the country that are showing up, that are going above and beyond, that are taking time in their evening out of their busy day. Maybe you just clocked out of work and you're here, and that matters. And it makes me feel less lonely. And I know that everybody on this call feels a little bit less lonely. So go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll call it a couple. But who am I, right? I'm Dalton George. I'm the national grassroots organizer for the Endangered Species Coalition. I'm here because of the folks at the Endangered Species Coalition and because I love all kinds of wildlife. And I'm lucky enough to live in Boone, North Carolina, right here in the Appalachian Mountains. And so I'll toss it over to Jewel, and then she'll keep moving it along, and you'll hear from each of our panelists.
Hi all, I'm Jewel Thomasula. I'm National Policy Director for the Endangered Species Coalition. So I handled tracking the policy changes, and a lot of it's tracking Congress and working with coalition partners. I'm based in the DC area, actually in Maryland. And just in these times, glad to be in these movements with such great coalition partners and talking to people who care about wildlife and nature. I'm going to pass to Pedro.
Yeah, hey everybody. Good evening from Fresno, California. Pedro here. I am the California State Program Manager with Green Latinos, and I'm here because I love animals and and I track a lot of policy stuff. So yeah, we're here to be nerds tonight and let you all know how you can be plugging in. And I'll pass it over next to Roxanne.
Hey guys, I'm Roxanne Quilty. I'm a co-founder and executive director of Gotham Bat Conservancy. I'm based out of Brooklyn, New York. I'm here because I love this country. I love the natural world that fills this country, and I believe that we deserve to keep it a clean, healthy, and happy place for all of its inhabitants, both human and otherwise. And I know that we can do it if we join together. So I love joining calls like this with amazing people like all of you here who are so passionate about that too.
Awesome, awesome. And so to start the call off, I don't think we do a good enough job. There's a slide before this. Are you switching back to it, Jewel? The Zoom delay. It's a big slide and it says we won, I believe. And I just want to say that we don't celebrate victories enough in the wildlife movement. And I think that that's something I really want to start this call by saying, right? So we knew that the House's big extinction bill spelled disaster for wildlife, for biodiversity, for so many causes that the organizations that you just heard from care about. And so we mobilized and we got them to delay the vote. That is a win. And in a world sometimes where it feels like there aren't a lot of wins to be had in Congress or for wildlife, this is one. And it's a result of the work that you've done. It's a result of the organizations on this call, some of the organizations in the chat right now. If you called Congress, if you did a letter to the editor, any sort of pressure that way, this is your win. Pat yourself on the back. Be proud of yourself. It shows that we can go out there and get it done for wildlife. And also, this is the part you might not want to hear as much, but it's as important. There's still work to do, right? We know that Congress is constantly trying to find ways to undercut key environmental protections and really look out for big money instead of critters. And so we want to keep the pressure. We want to continue organizing, and we want to make sure that we're all well informed on what's next to continue beating the House's big extinction bill and all the other attacks on wildlife. We can go to the next slide. To church, baby. Absolutely, Melissa. I need somebody like snapping in the audience. You know, I grew up in the South. That's how the churches were down here. So a win for wildlife. Let's quantify that real quick, and all of you can add your own numbers from organizations, and it will really impress you. This is just from ESC and some of the small work that we've done, which really generated huge interest and pressure on the folks in Congress. So we did thousands of calls, emails, and posts, putting pressure on the House, letting them know this bill is toxic and we will not stand for it. We're going to make noise. We're going to let you know that we're watching and we don't want you to vote on it. And if you do get a chance to vote on it, we want you to vote no. Over a third of those folks were in swing districts. These are people that are paying attention to what their constituents are saying because they're afraid of what happens in the next election. And they went and told their leadership in Congress, hey, y'all, I'm worried to vote on this bill with all these poison pill riders. I think I'm going to get in a lot of trouble because the good folks in my district are showing up for wildlife. And that's incredible. If you were one of those people, great work. That pays off. Then letters to the editors in 5 key in 5 key states. Excuse me, y'all. Now, this blew my mind. Pedro and Jewel will nod along. I'm a country bumpkin. I didn't know much about Congress until I get involved with the Endangered Species Coalition. I've since learned there's a person in every congressional office staff that just looks through the newspaper and sees where their member is mentioned. Okay. And so if you're mentioning my member needs to vote the right way, somebody in that office saw it and flagged it. There's a lot of power there. And if you haven't wrote one yet, I hope this is your kind of encouragement to do so. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And ultimately, right, this resulted in us delaying the vote, getting what we needed, showing that our movement was organized and ready to mobilize when need be. And that's a win. And there on the right, you could see one of our previous calls with Jewel's smiling face. And half of me, I'm getting cut off out of frame, and that's okay. And Roxanne and other great organizations that joined us. Next slide. And so I'm a believer because it's an evening call. You've had a long day. I'm going to walk y'all through the agenda just so you know what you're getting in for. We've got our intro. We've done that. You could check that off. We've got our win. We've done that. And then we're going to have folks talk to you about kind of what's been going on since last call, frame up some of the policy conversation, talk about some timely news, all of that, make you feel up to date. So even if you missed those previous calls, you're involved in this campaign. It's okay. We need all the help that we can get. We need people plugged in that care, that know what's going on. Then we're going to rally for wildlife. Everybody you see here is going to talk about what we need to do, how we need to go further for wildlife, and what this win means for them and their organizations. And then stick around. Sometimes the rally can feel like the end. We saw this in our earlier session, had a couple of people say, okay, I'm heading out. Then we're going to make some commitments on what we're going to do in the movement to keep winning, to keep this momentum going. And then we'll close y'all out, get you out of here around 8:30, 8:45 for those on the East Coast. And these are just some of the great organizations that have helped and so many more, and just can't give them enough praise and appreciation for all of the work they've done around this bill and so many other people across the biodiversity movement. And I believe I'm going to toss it over to my policy colleagues to talk a little bit about where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Dalton. So here's this update since our last call and we were talking about. So I know many of you might have been engaging on this, but we might have some new folks here. But for all, this House's big Extinction Bill, it has this number, HR 4754. It's such a big extinction bill, just an unacceptable proposal. It's eliminating protections for so many endangered species, like the gray wolf. You might be familiar with Representative Boebert's bill. It has its own HR number. It's taking the gray wolf off of the endangered species list. That language is included in the House's big extinction bill. So it would have that same effect. It'd be taking away these really important protections for the gray wolf. It's also taking away the Endangered Species Act protections for the grizzly bear in the Yellowstone ecosystem. You might have heard about the bill from Representative Hageman, also has its own HR number, but that language is also included in this bill in full, as well as some other sections of this bill that are blocking the reintroduction of the grizzly bear into the North Cascades ecosystem and the Bitterroot ecosystem, which is so essential for actually having true grizzly recovery. There's also a section in this bill that's blocking funding for the northern long-eared bat. And blocking funding is essentially making it meaningless. You can't actually have these protections if there's no one enforcing it, if there's no funding to support the recovery efforts and monitoring and habitat protections. So blocking that funding is like eliminating these, it's really important protections for the bat at this critical moment. And so these are just a few examples. There's so much more that, and we have a list of them on our webpage around the House's big extinction bill. But these are all stuffed into one package. And the formal name that Congress is using for it is the House's Department of the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act of 2026. So the key word there is appropriations. That's the term that within Congress they're using to talk about funding of the federal agencies, government funding, sometimes government spending, but appropriations is that key term there. And that's not a term that most people know. So that's totally normal that you're not thinking about it, but wanting to help make that connection for you here, that if you're seeing appropriations, that is a really high stakes conversation that happens in Congress because it's such an essential part of what Congress does. It's their job to appropriate funding, to decide the federal funding for the agencies. And these agencies are overseeing the Endangered Species Act and stewarding nature in so many other ways. And I'm going to pass to Pedro next to talk more about the House's big extinction bill.
Yeah. And so what's really unique about congressional budget decision making as opposed to some of the budget happenings of maybe your local city council or like county government is that these proposals also have like multiple different policy writers, as Jewel was mentioning. So for example, you could fund, let's say, the National Park Service at $100 million, just to throw a number out. But you can also put really nasty things in there. And part of it is to force a hard vote or to unify a nefarious coalition to support something. But this bill also weaponizes reducing funding as well too, as a way to backtrack on our environmental progress. So for example, species threatened by habitat loss and climate change are threatened by the provision of proposing almost $14 million for offshore oil and gas development and another $15 million for onshore oil and gas development. So, we all know that climate change is one of the main drivers for habitat loss and different climate stressors that, impact up and down the food chain that ourselves and different wildlife are reliant on. Species threatened by hunting are also at higher risk because this proposal seeks to block restrictions on hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting on federal lands, in addition to preventing regulations on lead ammunition. So essentially, they want to remove the existing proposed protections or just ultimately roll back the number of acres where hunting and fishing and shooting are prohibited. In addition to lead ammunition, which is something that also has really damaging impacts along the food chain as well. And also just like generally for different layers of protected lands, this bill also promotes more mining, which can contaminate drinking water and groundwater aquifers, in addition to just overall habitat loss. This is also, there's provisions for promoting pesticide use and creation as well too. Also for promoting border wall construction on sensitive lands such as wildlife refuges, wilderness areas along the border, and also blocking lease withdrawals, which are time-bound prohibitions on mineral extraction in very targeted areas. So what we're seeing here is one, they're reducing the funding for staffing. Two, they're also prohibiting protections for specific species. But then three, also the different actions that they're trying to promote in the bill just have overall uh, adverse impacts for the different species that we're trying to protect here as well too. So all of this crazy stuff is happening in one bill. So again, if anyone does have any questions or um, wants any more like clarification, we're happy to explain further. But one reason why we're just focusing so intently is because there's so many different things on so many different parallel tracks in one bill as well too. But the main goal here is to just demonstrate how the appropriations process can be a way for better and for worse to advance or retract policy. And one really unique thing about the appropriations process, as opposed to other legislation in Congress, is that Congress has to appropriate funds every year. So this is something that like absolutely has to happen. Um, and the lack of progress on this is actually what we'll get into later on about a government shutdown. But what to really take away from this conversation is that appropriation has to happen every year. And so there are lots of ways to use this mandatory process to advance or to roll back different provisions. And I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
And so as we talk about kind of the bill and all of these bad things that Pedro was talking about in it, I think it's important to frame up this kind of timeline. I'm a believer in maps. So here's this beautiful map I pulled together. And first, right, the House's big extinction bill was introduced. It was full of the bad things that we talked about, attacks on wildlife, attacks on biodiversity, all of these things. And it was put under this title that's really hard for folks to understand, right? Appropriations funding bill. I mean, nobody's sitting down at their kitchen table talking about that. And I think that's one of the sneaky things Congress was doing. They were trying to attack a number of things that folks really value in this big kind of, I guess, hard to understand funding bill. And so we decided, hey, we weren't going to let that stand. And we wanted to organize to put pressure on Congress, specifically the House. We wanted to make this bill as toxic as possible, as early as possible. I always love to tell on Jewel here, but Jewel said, I'm tired of playing defense, right? I want to play offense. I want to go to the House when they introduce this bill, and instead of just waiting for the Senate, hopefully to fix it, I want to make these attacks on wildlife, on biodiversity, on the ESA as toxic as possible on the front end. And that's offense, and we did that and we won. And it feels good to win on offense, y'all. Let me tell you, if you love playing just defense in the wildlife movement, say so in the chat. You might be a little lonely in that, but we won on offense. And so that translates into the September vote being delayed. They felt the pressure. They recognized, hey, this is not the time to vote on this. But maybe that doesn't mean that it's gone forever. There are a lot of interesting political kind of forces right now, a lot of votes happening, and it's important that we understand the now what, so we understand how we can use this momentum to keep the pressure on and make sure that a funding bill isn't adopted with anti-wildlife provisions. And so Jules going to talk about that now what as we move through this little map.
Right. As Dalton mentioned, the House vote was a key leverage point. So that House bill, if they had had a vote, that was a key leverage point. Just the fact that they were talking about having a vote, we knew for a fact that House leaders wanted to vote on this. They had it on top of their to-do list for September. And that didn't happen because of pressure. They would have sailed through if they knew that they had it, but they were hearing the nervousness about it. They knew that it wasn't sure. And that was, something we're celebrating here. So key. But we do still need to see a funding deal. And so what we're seeing right now, the current conversation is that congressional leaders are pivoting to extending the deadline, because with appropriations and government funding comes up on a deadline, September 30th, today, right now. So they're pivoting to extending their deadline. In that they're thinking we'll go quiet. We delayed a vote. They didn't vote on this bill. That's great. They're thinking we'll be like, okay, we're done. Thinking we'll go quiet. And in this negotiation process that can be so tense and fraught, they can see that as an opportunity to sneak in poison pill writers, as we were talking about, in these drastic cuts. And we talked about beating the House's big extinction bill. That's been a goal, but it's not the ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is healthy, thriving nature, right? Endangered species being recovered, clean air, clean water, the nature that is thriving and we're living happily in. This is a vision we have. This is our goal. And beating the big extinction bill is part of that. But healthy, thriving nature requires a funding bill that ensures federal agencies do their part to keep endangered species protected and steward nature. Oh, let's refresh on the dynamics here. We still need to see a funding bill. We still need to see a deal. And what do we need to be doing? We do still need to be keeping some pressure on the House of Representatives. And the news, the House margin is even more narrow. There's 219 Republicans, 214 Democrats in the House. That's a difference of 5. So if we look ahead and however things play out, if they did bring this bill back, we're still in really good shape. We're in better shape than we were this summer because of all the work we've done. We're in strong footing to see that vote fail. We're thinking they're not going to even bring it up again because they're so nervous and they're pivoting to extending the deadline and just talking about hashing out a deal. And so now is also the time to take the fight to the Senate. So how appropriations works, any funding bill will need 60 votes in the Senate. There are 53 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents who align with Democrats. So with how things get political and how things tend to fall on party lines, neither party has it in the bag. The Republicans do hold the majority in the Senate, and they are the ones that decide what comes for a vote. They set the agenda, they call the votes. The Republicans, as the majority, they don't have it in the bag. They're in a position where they have to negotiate with Democrats and come up with a bipartisan deal in the Senate. And that is important for as we're thinking about our strategy and having a funding bill that is going to get us towards our goal of healthy, thriving nature. All right, so now our latest news, and after I'm going to talk a bit on this slide, Pedro's going to also talk here, and after that we'll have questions. Just wanted to tee up that this is where we're going to just have this discussion and we're going to stop for questions after this. But just right now, literally right now, it's looking like we're going to have a government shutdown because they are not coming up with a decision around extending the deadline. And really, it's politics overtaking policy right now. It's we literally just saw a Senate vote about an hour ago where it was 55 voting yes and 45 voting no on this extension of the deadline. And in this, there's also this push to protect people's health care and secure protections for congressionally appropriated funding. And it's really concerning that what the Republican majority put forth to extend the deadline would be a blank check for the president and enable more unlawful staffing cuts that we've been seeing over this past year. We've been seeing essentially a serial government shutdown over this past year with federal agencies, many of them over wildlife and nature. Has been unlike anything that people have seen over the past decades in this country. So I know Pedro has some great stories on this too.
Wow, great stories.
Great examples of bad things.
Yeah, I have examples and stories. I'm not sure if they're great. No, but yeah, it's we wanted to talk about the government shutdown because it seems as it is definitely guaranteed, at least for the foreseeable couple of days. I should maybe start off by saying the longest government shutdown in US history was 35 days in the first Trump administration. And what a shutdown means is that there has no funding available for like core federal government duties. And so usually, and I say usually because there is no normal anymore, but usually during a government shutdown, there are a couple of like core agencies and like workforces that continue to work, whether they're paid or whether they're furloughed or not paid with the promise of back pay, is usually maybe like Social Security, the military. We actually, I saw some breaking news a couple of an hours ago that the um, the workforce in the Department of Interior that's in charge of oil extraction is going to continue to operate during the government shutdown. So there are it's never a total shutdown, but what it means specifically for biodiversity and for just public land conservation is that our parks will likely be unstaffed. And we saw in 2019 how our public lands were, you know, literally trashed. There was cultural sites that were irreparably damaged. There were people who were hunting on our public lands, people who were driving their vehicles in places that were not supposed to have a vehicle presence. And so what we ultimately saw was that there was a net loss in the quality of our public lands. This also means that we will likely not have people monitoring wildlife, and particularly, for example, for fall migration for bird species as well too. Collecting data is going to be super important, especially right now. And so, why this is happening though is a couple of different reasons. One is that this is procedurally one of the only ways that Democrats actually have leverage in forcing a vote or stalling negotiations. As Jewel had mentioned, the Democrats are not in the majority, and they're using their handful of votes to prevent the Senate from reaching 60 votes. And so one is that they're targeting healthcare primarily because it polls really well. A couple of months ago, the Republicans passed their big 1% tax break bill, which eliminated or eliminate taxes for the ultra wealthy while cutting millions of Americans off of healthcare. So it's very timely and polls really well. But another demand, which is really important, so I want to emphasize this, is that they're demanding protections for the money that they appropriate. And why this is important, if y'all remember Doge, remember that, how long ago it seemed? But also the president is unilaterally freezing and withholding money that Congress has approved. And so it's Congress's authority to authorize money. And so essentially the Democrats are saying, hey, what good is a bipartisan deal, or what good is any deal if we don't have protections for the deal? And so historically, the budget cuts, the firings, the withholding money that we've seen in the news that has impacted conservation staffing throughout the country, those are all really questionable and often illegal maneuvers from the Trump administration. So they want protections from all the things that have been demonstrated to have happened up until this point in time. And now we're kind of in this eternal kind of standoff to see how long things are going to go. And so the Republicans are blaming the Democrats are blaming Republicans, and also want safeguards. And, it's going to be our duty to make sure that however, this budget shutdown is resolved, that we ultimately have the framework to still have robust funding to protect wildlife. And from my perspective and from the perspective of Green Latinos, we need these safeguards for appropriation, because it doesn't matter if the government resumes in 2 days if the money that we that our representatives vote for is going to be just withheld. So that means that you know, habitat rehabilitation projects are not going to be able to be funded. Species reintroduction is not going to be able to be funded. So this is more of a constitutional crisis of the power of Congress, and whether or not the executive branch supersedes the constitutionally mandated authority of Congress. So I know that's a lot. Um, and all of us are going to be like in full shutdown mode. I think we already kind of are. And we're going to see, you know, whether our parks stay open, whether or not we see immediately impacts for species. And, you know, I think we're going to really rely on people like you all to share these stories from the ground to us, so we can communicate this to the broader public and to members of Congress to highlight the potential damages from what we're seeing here. So yeah, again, that was a lot. I'll pause and maybe pass it back to Jewel to see if
Yeah,
you have
we're
anything
pausing
else.
for questions now. We're clarifying, and I'm just gonna, uh, you know, healthcare polls though, because it affects people, right? There's real impacts there, and kind of speaking as a human, like we're a movement here, like that. That's real impacts to real people, and you know, part of our vision here is we have nature and biodiversity, but we're also finding a way for people to be healthy and live in harmony too. I just wanted to note that, like, there we stand in solidarity there, and you know, if it, and part of that, it's the other way around, right? If it was losing our wildlife and putting us on the path to extinction, we would want this holding firm for that as well. And so now looking in the chat for questions or in the Q&A box, I do see one in the Q&A box that's about that week that came from earlier. But we can share the National Bat Week effort as well. Right. Earlier it took a little bit before the questions came in, so we'll give a chance, but also all right if
There's a question from Grant that asks, what are the next steps?
yeah, well, we are getting, I guess we're ready to move on to that. People understood this, are understanding the situation. So um, we'll get to our, yeah, we have the next steps. We have, I did share that toolkit link if you want to look ahead, but we will get to that. So yeah, we'll move right along then.
Yeah, we see two messages here from folks, the hosts and panelists, and everybody can see it, but it's like y'all are reading our mind. What are the next steps? And so start contacting our Congress people about all this. We're going to talk about each of those things in detail. First, we want to do a rally just so you can hear from each of these folks. We'll have Pedro start, then Roxanne, then Jewel, and just talk about what the delay in the vote means as far as how it's a win. Or maybe we'll go in the opposite order, Pedro, since you weren't at our rally earlier. Maybe we'll go Jewel, Roxanne, Pedro, and see. I'm keeping icing the kicker right here. I'm sorry, y'all. And we're going to talk about what this win means, and also the need to continue to kind of apply the pressure and keep organizing, just to kind of give y'all some energies from folks that are intimately involved in the work. So, Jewel, I'll let you start, and then pass it to Roxanne, and so on.
All right. Well, noting that this is a win for wolves, just shouting out the wolf advocate community here who really turned up and key areas across the country to really draw the connection how this bill is taking away protections for wolves, and also in doing so, we're connecting to the whole big picture of nature and other species. So by defending wolves, also defending other species, and just big kudos there. They're such great partners. And I'm going to shout out Melissa Smith, who's been in the chat from Wisconsin. and who had shared and joined us on these calls before. And that, delaying this vote, stopping this vote, they did not want to vote on something that was going to make the wolf advocates mad. And so just keep that up. So much kudos, and this is a win for you all. So now Roxanne.
Hey y'all, I'm Roxanne. Like I said earlier, I'm one of the co-founders and an executive director of Gotham Bat Conservancy, and we're a nonprofit. We're small but mighty. We're based out of New York, and our mission is to protect our native bat species through education, public engagement, research, and conservation efforts. And I'm sure that a lot of people on this call, because you are wildlife lovers, are aware that many of our bat species here in the United States are really in great peril due in large part to the spread of white nose syndrome, which is an incredibly deadly disease caused by a fungus that was first found to be have entered the United States around 2007 in upstate New York. And on top of that, those dramatic population losses are only compounded by the issues that all of our wildlife are facing, right, with climate change and habitat destruction and disruption to their migration corridors. And I want to talk specifically about this beautiful, how can I get out of the way? This beautiful guy right here, the northern long-eared bat, because Section 127 of this bill targets them specifically. So the northern long-eared bat is truly staring down the barrel of extinction. We were lucky enough to have them officially listed as endangered in 2022. Something that's important to know about them is that the northern long-eared bat's range encompasses a really large portion of the eastern and north central North America, extending up into Canada, as far south as Florida. So they play a really vital role in a really wide array of ecosystems found throughout that huge land range. And from a human perspective, they are insectivores, and they provide really essential insect control that helps protect human health and infrastructure and industry. And this species is uniquely vulnerable compared to some of our other threatened bats, because northern long-eared bats typically don't form large colonies. They prefer to roost in smaller groups or individually. And the reason that makes them particularly susceptible to habitat disturbances is that they require a large variety of roosting sites to meet their needs throughout the year. So they're to industries like the timber industry, they're a particularly challenging species to protect because their habitat is so wide-ranging. When we got them listed in 2022, that was a huge win and an amazing first step in trying to help them rebound from these horrible population losses that they've experienced. Unfortunately, in this bill, like I said, Section 127 would, for all intents and purposes, delist them because it would remove all funding to the efforts to protect them. And obviously, without that funding, we can't enact any of the protections provided by the ESA. And we know as Gotham Bat Conservancy and as animal advocates and as scientists that without those protections, it's essentially inevitable that this really important species will go extinct. So that was a lot. That was really heavy, and this call has been really heavy. So I want to just take a second, take a deep breath, and remember that we're also here today to celebrate a huge win of delaying this bill. I think in times like this, it's so easy to feel so small and so alone in this fight. But when I join calls like this and every day in the work that I do, I'm reminded constantly that there are so many more of us who really care. And I refuse to accept that the environment is a partisan issue. It's a human issue. It affects all of us. Each animal plays an important role in protecting this beautiful, delicate planet that keeps us all alive and thriving. And I know in my heart and for a fact that when we organize, we become the biggest fear of the people trying to stop our fight against this, right? So being here tonight, being on these calls, being with like-minded people, speaking up about these issues, writing to your representatives, writing these letters to the editor, all of these things that you're doing, that's exactly what the people who are against these protections are afraid that you're going to do. So thank you so much for being here tonight, for standing up, for helping us push this movement forward. I care so much about this planet. I care so much about every human and animal who lives in this country. And I know that if we keep standing together, it's scary, but we're going to keep making progress. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And thank you to the Endangered Species Coalition, because you guys are just amazing leaders in this fight. Thanks, y'all.
Um, wow, man, tough act to follow. But you know, it's right now we're facing a time where we're experiencing the kind of compounding risks of ecosystem collapse, but also the collapse of our civic institutions. And so it's really important to not underestimate what as you can do as individuals or members of your own community, whether it's, you know, just raising more awareness about these really niche but highly important issues in your community, or if you take, you know, higher steps up the ladder of engagement to write this op-ed or to call your senator or representative every day to let them know that you don't support any actions that harm wildlife, that reduce the quality, environmental quality of the one planet that we have. You know, there's a lot of power in those really simple statements. And I want to just like, you know, from the policy perspective, let everyone know where we're situated. This really toxic bill, as much as it was delayed, is still something that they want to pass. You know, so like if this is going to be a major issue to reconsider once we clear this government shutdown hurdle, however long it takes. But what's really important to also remember as we're just kind of like wrapping up is that as dark as things maybe seem, we've experienced several significant wins this year as well too. And there's a lot of experience to reflect on as we're now officially going to begin October in a couple of hours of what we've learned since January. And so I think we're going to be in a really good position to just double down, to continue to educate ourselves and to continue to educate our community members and really engage with Congress because ultimately this is a public institution, and everyone here on this call has the right to engage with the public government that represents the public. So please feel that you have ownership and that you have agency to engage here because you should engage. Like, we do want your voice. A lot of things happen because there aren't anyone watching, and then there aren't anyone commenting and aren't anyone engaging after the fact. So, um, you know, please continue to engage with the Endangered Species Coalition. You know, we're gonna be reading all these crazy long documents and trying to make sense of these political happenings as a resource to you all as well too, to support y'all's local engagement. So, you know, please don't let up right now. We are the voice for animals and ecosystems that don't have voices in Congress. And so your voice matters double or triple as much in this conversation. So yeah, thank you again, everyone. And I'll pass it back to Joel.
Awesome, y'all. So we've got the toolkit in the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit about that toolkit in a second. And so much of this was just said in the rally, and I'm about to wrap us up, and we're running just a tad bit long. But I just want to say we know organizing works through this win, and you know, if you've called your house rep, sometimes it can feel like you're calling into this black box. If you've posted on social media, if you've written a letter to the editor, sometimes it's just like, oh, that's energy going out there, and who knows what happens with it. We'll take this right now. You can say Dalton George told you this is proof that organizing works, that everything you did mattered, and we won because of it. Now you could cash that in at the bank. I'm telling you that right now. We know organizing works. Remind yourself of that. Remind your community of that. Like Pedro said, it's that agency piece. Convince people you have agency. We don't just have to roll over and accept a Congress and a legislature that's doing things that don't reflect the values of me and my neighbors. That's not how this has to work. And we saw that even recently in a vote in the House, a vote that happened in the House to exempt the Department of Defense from this Endangered Species Act. We beat that, and we peeled off votes that previously we maybe thought we could never peel off before. And that's because all of this work is interconnected. If you're calling your legislator, your House rep, and your senator all the time, and you're going, hey, I love the northern long-eared bat, and you need to make sure that you're protecting wildlife and legislating, they're going to think about that when the DOD exemption comes. They're going to think about that when the House's big extinction bill comes, all of this. So none of the work is meaningless, and it matters. And even if you have a House rep you maybe don't think will ever go your way, trust me, I live in a rural part in North Carolina. I've got a House rep that doesn't vote our way half the time, but don't create that excuse for them. Don't let folks get away from the fact that they're not representing what matters to you and your folks and your family. And so we're going to do this really quick. This is the last piece of tonight. I want to commit to the fight with you folks. And so we're going to go to the next slide. And I'm not a big believer as a presenter in reading things off, but I think it's important that we read things off right here. And this is exactly the next steps that we were talking about. So I commit taking the fight to the Senate and asking my senators to vote no on any funding bill that eliminates protections for endangered species and harms nature. That's a script right there to your senator's office. That's what you need to be saying, especially as this kind of shutdown conversation continues, this funding conversation continues. That is the message. You could see that on the toolkit that Jewel has linked a couple of times, and you will be getting that in an email as well. Next, I commit to writing a letter to the editor to ask my reps and senators to reject the House's big extinction bill. It's still important to call out these bad poison pill riders, these attacks on wildlife. All of those are also listed on that toolkit. After that, I commit to mobilizing 10 of my friends to call their reps and senators. I always tell folks that, there's a lot of people in your life that want to get involved in this movement. And I think sometimes things are so fraught, we almost don't want to pull people in and let them see behind the curtain because it can get depressing. But we're robbing the people in our lives from getting involved and having an impact. So, if you're out to eat with a friend that cares deeply about wildlife, but maybe isn't as involved as you, isn't on these calls, tell them about it. Say, hey, I'll sit with you as you call your House rep. I'll coach you through it, right? It's not going to be that scary. That has so much more power than you realize. And then lastly, y'all, because I'm a really good person, you don't have to type all these things if you're going to do them all. And you could just type, I commit to beating the big extinction bill for wildlife, or I commit to all of it. And just look at the folks across the country, hopefully, that type in the chat that they're committing to that, and know that we're really going to go out there and we're going to keep winning. We're going to continue to win for wildlife. We're going to deliver. We're going to continue to grow this movement, and so much more. I'm looking to the commit. Oh, and there's a letter to the editor guide in the toolkit too. I think maybe I got tongue tied there. I commit. Thank you so much, Genevieve. I'm glad to see that. The first one is always the toughest right there. So sending you so much appreciation for that. And I know that if our wildlife could say they appreciate you, they would. And I know y'all aren't here for me. I get that, right? I'm not a believer in saying thank yous. You're here for wildlife. And if I can speak on their behalf, I will say that it really matters and it makes a difference. And I'm seeing some of these commitments come through. And we're around, right? So the Endangered Species Coalition, these groups that you see here, we are available. You will have my email. I'm going to be sending a follow-up email with all the information and the contacts of the panelists that you heard, so you can follow up with them. If you write a letter to the editor, let me know. Would love to see it get published and celebrate you. I think that's huge. Just to remind you, you're not alone in this, and just to give you a pat on the back. And continue supporting our organizations in whatever way you can, especially our policy folks, y'all. I mean, with the shutdown and all this, I feel like Jewel needs somebody to buy her a beer or something, if you don't mind me saying that. So, consider donating to one of these incredible organizations. But thank you so much. We've got a closing slide with an eagle, but love to see those commitments go in. The commitment goes without saying. That's what we love. Inform as many peeps as possible. Great work, everybody, and have a great evening, and stay posted. There'll be more opportunities like this, and please look to get involved with one of the groups you heard from tonight. But thankful for everybody in our movement. Thankful for this win, and I'm excited to keep kicking tail with y'all, if I may say so. So have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.